I call it rock and roll, and it is the logical successor to original rock and roll. This is the scabby bastard child of rock and roll. That's why it'll always come back. They'll never get rid of it.
If rock and roll were a religion, then Lemmy Kilmister was the last man keeping its sacred flame alive. Not because he sang the best, played the most complex music, or sold the most records, but because he was the only one who lived exactly as rock and roll once promised, before it was tamed. Wild, free, brutally honest, and never apologizing for who he was. In a world where rockers strained themselves to fit the times, Lemmy stood as an untamed outlaw. Cowboy hat, mutton chops, a gravelly voice like sandpaper, and eyes that never sought approval. He smoked, drank Jack Daniels like water, wrote songs about war, death, betrayal, and sang as if every word bled straight from his own life. No one else was like him. No one else dared to live like him. For later generations, Lemmy was just a heavy metal icon. But for those who grew up between walls covered with posters, stray bullets of punk rock, the rebellion of the 80s, and the loneliness only music could cure. Lemmy was not a singer. He was a witness, the last remnant of an era unbroken. And when he died, the world didn't just lose a musician. It lost a piece of the soul of rock and roll, the very soul that had been fading away in cigarette smoke, amphetamines, and the roaring bass of a man who refused to bow. I'm not a hero. I'm just a musician trying to stay true to myself. You may not listen to Motörhead. You may not like him, but you will never find another man like Lemmy Kilmister. Early life. Lemmy Kilmister was born on December 24th, 1945, Christmas Eve. But no miracle came to that child. When Ian Fraser Kilmister let out his first cry in Burslem, Staffordshire, England, the Second World War had just ended, Britain lay in ruins, and his family had already fallen apart. Only 3 months after his birth, his father, a vicar in the Church of England, walked out on him and his mother without a word. Lemmy grew up with a blurred memory. No father's hand on his shoulder, no explanation, just a cold emptiness that nothing could fill. Later, his mother took him to live with his grandparents in Newcastle-under-Lyme before moving to rural Wales, where life only grew harsher. There, young Ian was the only English-speaking child in a school full of Welsh-speaking students, and that difference was punished brutally. He was beaten, mocked, pushed out of every game, every group, every lesson. Lemmy would later say, "I learned very early that the world has no place for the weak. No one comes to save you. You either save yourself or you never get saved." His childhood had no friends, no shelter, and nowhere that could be called home. At 10, Lemmy thought life might improve when his mother remarried. But her new husband, a former Scottish soldier, was stern, distant, and cold. Life in that house was heavy dinners, rigid rules, and unfamiliar stares. Lemmy never truly spoke to his stepfather. The man never beat him, never shouted, but he never opened his heart either. In his solitude, Lemmy turned to the radio, then to an old guitar his mother had bought from a flea market. He copied riffs from the Shadows, devoured Chuck Berry and Little Richard. Music became the first and only thing that never betrayed him. A childhood friend once recalled, "He was always laughing, always sarcastic, but his eyes never seemed to belong here." Lemmy never forgave his father, nor did he ever trust in family bonds. In one rare mention of him, he said, "A priest who abandons his wife and child. He taught me that morality is just a mask." That child, abandoned in a world without language, broken from the inside, grew up not through love, but through defiance. And when Lemmy later played bass like a punch to the ear, it wasn't just music. It was the roar of a child once silenced. Early career. London in the late 1960s was a storm drenched in drugs, sex, war, and music, a place where an entire generation of young Britons tried to forget the scars of war by living fast, loving recklessly, and playing music as if tomorrow would never come. In that whirlwind, Lemmy Kilmister, by then calling himself Lemmy, was still just a broke drifter, wandering with a guitar and a hazy dream. No one knows for certain where the name Lemmy came from. Some say it was shorthand for his catchphrase, "Lemmy a fiver. Lend me 5 quid." But that nickname, however accidental, captured his spirit perfectly. A life without barriers, without pretense, always willing to ask, always ready to gamble. He worked as a laborer, a salesman, even a hand model, but destiny only truly called when he landed a job as a roadie for Jimi Hendrix. Lemmy recalled, "I had to get acid for Hendrix every morning. I watched him from the wings and realized, I'll never play guitar like him. But I can learn how to burn everything down just by being there." From then on, Lemmy gradually switched to bass, not out of passion at first, but because so many bands needed a bassist. Yet, once again, he turned necessity into identity, playing bass like lead guitar, loud, distorted, aggressive, transforming it into a weapon of sound. He joined obscure rock groups like the Rockin' Vickers, who toured across Europe in a van, sleeping in abandoned churches. Lemmy once ended up in war-torn Yugoslavia, nearly arrested on suspicion of being a spy. For him, the worst gig was still better than a single day filling out paperwork. By 1971, a turning point came when he was invited to join Hawkwind, a bizarre space rock outfit known for playing in clouds of drugs and laser lights. Lemmy was only supposed to play bass, but when a member failed to show up, he suddenly found himself on lead vocals, and his raw, gravelly growl sent audiences into a frenzy. The track "Silver Machine," sung by Lemmy, became Hawkwind's first big hit. But Lemmy was never like the rest of the band, who drowned themselves in LSD, meditation, and surrealist philosophy. He preferred speed, whiskey, prostitutes, and he believed in no religion at all. The clash came to a head in 1975 when he was arrested at the Canadian border for possession of amphetamines. Hawkwind fired him without hesitation. When asked about it, Lemmy simply said, "I was the only one on speed in a band full of acid heads. I was too realistic for them." Cast out, misunderstood, expelled from the very music he had helped shape, Lemmy didn't collapse. He turned that humiliation into fuel. Months later, he formed a new band, Motörhead, named after the last song he wrote for Hawkwind and slang for a speed freak. No one in the music industry expected anything from them, but from that very failure, a new legend was born. Ferocious, uncompromising, and utterly irreplaceable. Career success. When Lemmy founded Motörhead in 1975, no one believed the band would last more than a few albums. Their music was too loud, too raw, too fast, too real. At a time when rock was becoming polished and technical, critics dismissed them as a bunch of drunk musicians with a sound like a rusty drill. Yet that very chaos became the new symbol for a generation sick of artificial glamour. Motörhead released their self-titled debut in 1977, a success just enough to survive. But by 1979, everything changed. 2 back-to-back albums, Overkill and Bomber, began to shake up the British scene, introducing a style unlike anyone else's. Bass played like lead guitar, drums pounding like artillery, and vocals that sounded like thunder in a firestorm. Still, no one truly understood Lemmy until he fired the shot called Ace of Spades, 1980. With its title track, Lemmy didn't just create a song for the ages. He redefined rock and roll with what seemed like a simple formula: lethal speed, razor-sharp riffs, and vocals that followed no rules. But it was the lyrics that cemented Ace of Spades as legend. You know I'm born to lose and gambling's for fools, but that's the way I like it, baby. I don't want to live forever. No one had ever heard a man sing about defiance with such raw truth. Lemmy wasn't just singing. He was gambling with destiny itself. The Ace of Spades album became Motörhead's biggest breakthrough, reaching number 4 in the UK and turning Lemmy into an irreplaceable face of extreme rock. But Lemmy didn't change. Invited onto Top of the Pops, Britain's national music TV show, he still wore leather, smoked on set, and played live as if he were in a dive bar. From then on, Motörhead entered a golden age lasting nearly a decade, with iconic albums like Iron Fist, 1982, Another Perfect Day, 1983, Orgasmatron, 1986. They never had a big hit in the US, no flashy MTV videos, no Grammy awards, but they had something no other band could claim: the faith of loyal fans. People who believed that as long as Lemmy sang, rock and roll wasn't dead. Motörhead was less like a band and more like a cult, and Lemmy was its high priest, though he always denied it. For decades, Lemmy played thousands of shows, lived on tour buses, and followed one unbreakable rule: no playback, no bullshit, no apologies. He drank Jack and Coke before hitting the stage, smoked mid-song, and screamed until his throat tore, never retreating an inch. Even when his body began to betray him, the music never slowed. Overkill, Stay Clean, Eat the Rich, Killed by Death, each title like a warning. Don't expect Lemmy to ease up. For Lemmy, success was never the goal. Survival without compromise was the victory. And if there was ever a man who lived the rock and roll ideal from the first riff to the final drum beat, it was him. Turmoil and Shadows. Lemmy Kilmister always lived as if death were someone else's problem. He drank Jack Daniels with Coca-Cola every day for more than 3 decades, smoked like breathing, and used amphetamines to the point that doctors once said his blood was too thick to be donated to anyone else. But he didn't care. "I'm living proof that medicine is sometimes wrong," he said, half joking, half serious. But the body cannot endure such destruction forever. From the 2000s onward, Lemmy suffered from type 2 diabetes, heart failure, and high blood pressure. He needed a pacemaker. His legs swelled so badly he couldn't stand for long. Still, he went on stage, sometimes playing only 3 songs before collapsing backstage. For him, rest meant surrender, and Lemmy never surrendered. Beyond illness, he was embroiled in controversy over his collection of Nazi memorabilia. In his small apartment above the Rainbow Bar, he displayed SS hats, fascist badges, even Wehrmacht officer coats. European media accused him of glorifying fascism. Lemmy countered, "I collect history, not ideology. I don't love Hitler. I want to understand how he made the whole world follow him." Even so, images of him wearing SS uniforms on stage left the public unwilling to fully forgive. In his personal life, Lemmy avoided loud scandals, but carried a quiet loneliness. He claimed to have slept with over 1,000 women, yet never married, never loved anyone long enough to call it love. "I don't want to hurt anyone the way my father did," he said, and kept his distance from commitments ever since. He had one son, Paul Ender, but was absent through much of the boy's childhood. Only later did father and son reconnect, when Paul became a sound engineer. "I wasn't a good father," Lemmy admitted, "but I never pretended to be one." In his final years, he lived alone in his small apartment, spending days in his usual spot at the Rainbow Bar, playing slot machines, drinking vodka and orange juice, speaking to almost no one. "I'm used to being alone," he told a friend. No resentment, no complaint, just a truth he had accepted long ago. Behind the roaring bass and the reckless grin, Lemmy was a man carrying the shadows of an abandoned childhood, unfinished relationships, and a lifetime spent bracing himself so no one could see him weak. Personal life: Lemmy Kilmister never fit the mold of a settled man. No big house, no wife and children waiting, no dream of retiring in a villa garden. He lived in a cramped apartment above the Rainbow Bar and Grill, home to his favorite slot machine, a wall covered in photos of nude women, and a liquor cabinet that never ran dry. For Lemmy, that was enough. No interference, no control, no attachments. But that absolute freedom carried with it a quiet truth. He lived alone for nearly his entire life. Not because he couldn't love, but because he wouldn't allow himself to. "I've slept with over 1,000 women, but never lived with anyone long enough to call it love," he said, neither sad nor proud. It was a choice, and also the price. He did have a son, Paul Ender, born in 1967, from a fleeting relationship when Lemmy was young. But he wasn't there for the boy's childhood. He never drove him to school, never stood on the sidelines of a football match, never told him bedtime stories. Only when Paul grew up and entered music himself did father and son truly speak. "I wasn't a father, I was a friend. That's the best I could do," Lemmy admitted. And perhaps in that confession lay a regret too deep to name. Friends described Lemmy as genuine, but impossible to get close to. He helped others, spoke openly, but always kept a distance, as if afraid someone might see the fragile part within. A woman who was close to him for years once said, "He made you laugh, made you feel safe. But at night, you knew he would drink alone, needing no one." And that was true. Lemmy had no long-term girlfriends, no cohabitation, no engagement. He avoided such things as he avoided churches, not out of hatred, but because he never believed they were meant for him. His father's abandonment in childhood left him unable to trust permanence. "I can't commit. If I truly love someone, I'll hurt them. So it's better not to love," he once admitted. Instead, he found joy in simple things: collecting war books, listening to classical music, playing slot machines, and reading about ruthless historical figures. No one ever saw Lemmy cry, but no one dared say he didn't know pain. Perhaps the greatest paradox about Lemmy was this: he was the symbol of noise, yet lived a life of silence. A life not screaming from loneliness, simply accustomed to it, living with it, treating it like a shadow that could never be left behind. A death in silence. On December 24th, 2015, Lemmy Kilmister turned 70. The man who had survived decades of hard liquor, drugs, endless tours, and nameless illnesses was still there, sitting on his familiar bar stool at the Rainbow, holding a vodka and orange, playing the slot machine as always. No birthday cake, no noise, just a few close friends dropping by, raising a glass. No need for many words. Lemmy never liked birthdays. He only said, "70, huh? I should have died at 40. This is overtime." But only 2 days later, on the afternoon of December 26th, he began to feel dizzy, exhausted, unable to stand. Friends rushed him to the doctor, and then, like a cold knife, the doctor looked at them and said, "Cancer, brain and throat. Final stage." Nothing to be done. No miracle left. They gave him weeks, but Lemmy had only 2 days. He refused the hospital. Back in his apartment above the rainbow, he switched on his video game machine, sat down, and played until the very last moment. When the pain began to rise, he stayed silent. No groaning, no bitterness. A friend recalled, he died the way he lived, in silence, without bothering anyone. On December 28th, 2015, Lemmy passed away, alone, in the only place he ever called home, not under stage lights, not before an audience. Just an old chair, a glass of booze, and a screen showing a game he never won and never needed to win. When the news broke, the rock world shook. Ozzy Osbourne wrote, "A piece of rock and roll's soul is gone." Lemmy was the last warrior. Dave Grohl tattooed Lemmy on his finger, then screamed his name on stage as a farewell. Metallica posted a single line, "R.I.P. Lemmy. No one tougher, no one truer." On January 9th, 2016, his funeral was held in Los Angeles, streamed live on YouTube so millions of fans worldwide could say goodbye. On the memorial stage, those who had stood beside him, Slash, Rob Halford, Lars Ulrich, Scott Ian, Triple H, spoke through tears. No one called him saintly. No one called him good. They called him real. Lemmy's ashes were placed in bullet casings, engraved with his name, and given to his closest friends, as if he wanted to fire one last shot, not to destroy, but to be remembered. No death was ever like Lemmy's, because he didn't leave as a legend. He left as a man who had lived to the fullest, sitting upright, eyes wide open, controller in hand, and never once looking back. Legacy and influence. Lemmy Kilmister left behind no millions in fortune, no luxurious mansion, no charitable foundation bearing his name. But he left something money could never buy, an immeasurable influence, a way of life no one else dared to repeat, and a legend that never needed rewriting to sound prettier. For millions of fans around the world, Lemmy was not just a musician, he was a principle. He was the roar of bass against every convention. He was the snarling voice that dared to say what no one else would. He was the image of a man living true to his essence, to the very end. No pretending, no apologizing. His music, with Motörhead, never belonged to a fixed genre. It was something between heavy metal, punk, and rock and roll, blazing a path for a whole generation of rebels. Without Lemmy, there might not have been Metallica as we know it. No Slayer, no Dave Grohl, no countless underground bands clinging to the sound he birthed. But beyond music, Lemmy became a strange beacon for outsiders, for those who didn't fit, weren't accepted, and never knew how to live normally. He showed them, sometimes you don't need to win, just refusing to surrender is enough. There's no school that teaches someone to become Lemmy. No formula can produce a man at once fierce and kind, frightening and lovable, utterly lonely, yet profoundly influential. After his death, Motörhead disbanded immediately, not out of posturing, but because they understood. Without Lemmy, there is no Motörhead. It wasn't a band. It was him. Thousands of fans tattooed his face on their arms. Bars raised statues in his honor. Online games made him a character. An asteroid was named 243002 Lemmy. And every time Ace of Spades plays, people still feel a little more alive, a little stronger, a little bolder to hold their heads high in a chaotic world. Lemmy Kilmister never tried to be a legend, but because he never tried, he became the last man truly worthy of the name. No one can replace him, because no one has the courage to live as honestly as he did. Lemmy Kilmister didn't need to be called a legend. All he needed was an amp turned loud, a heavy Rickenbacker bass, a glass of Jack always full, and an audience mad enough to scream with him until the very last breath. No need to be clean, no need to be adored by all, only to live true to the end, even when facing illness, controversy, loneliness, or death itself. Someone once asked, what made Lemmy different? And the answer is perhaps this. In a world where everyone plays a role, he was the only one who never needed a script. He left as he lived. No farewell, no theatrics. But every time that Rickenbacker screeches, every time Ace of Spades explodes in battered headphones, people know Lemmy never really vanished. He just went on another tour where there are no hospitals, no deadlines, no judgments, only rock and roll and absolute freedom. What do you think? What truly makes a person immortal? Is it reaching the peak of fame? Or is it living so honestly that even without applause, the world will never forget? Share your thoughts about Lemmy. What moment, song, or quote of his stays with you forever? And more importantly, if you had to choose, would you rather be someone loved by all or someone who dares to live true, even if it means being alone?